Thank you very much for your readiness and interest to participate in this discussion. I just plan to do sort of a short presentation in 8 key points how I do see the foreign policy of Republic of Kosovo, and later on we could continue with comments and with questions. First of all, I believe that foreign policy is very closely linked with, let's say, internal policy and its extension. We do not see foreign policy as something independent and totally dissociated from the internal policy of a state. In this sense, in today's globalized world, in order to be properly interdependent, one shall be first properly independent. So I believe that Kosovo lacks in international arena in its relations and interdependency with other countries, because it is still not fully and truthfully independent. Therefore, we shall have full independence in order to have a proper interdependence. Point 2 is that relations with other countries we shall base on 2 key principles. First is mutual respect and recognition, and second is mutual interest for cooperation. As long as these principles are not there, there can be no proper relations with other countries. Point 3 is that as long as Republic of Kosovo did not achieve full membership in international organizations, and especially as long as we do not have a seat in UN, I believe that bilateral relations shall have priority in relation to, let's say, multilateral relations. I'm not against multilateral relations, and I do not want to neglect international multilateral relations, but it is the bilateral relations which have been neglected so far, more than 6 years now after declaration of independence. Therefore, multilateralism belongs to the register of consensus, of lowest common denominator, where countries are together in different international organizations and they operate, discuss together, but nonetheless that is way less effective. By being a small country as the Republic of Kosovo, joining a multilateral organization, you confirm your sovereignty and subjectivity, but on the other hand, at the same time, you relativize it. So being a member relativizes your independence. While in bilateral relations, we could have a partnership, and it is partnership which strengthens subjectivity and sovereignty even more, I believe so, than in multilateral organisms. Point 4 is that we shall not only focus on increasing the number of recognitions. Even our foreign ministry is not very clear how many countries really recognize us so far, because there are some obstacles which are not our fault for this. Since in different countries the opinions between president, prime minister, the government after coup d'etat changed. Therefore, it is not a very clear number of countries who recognize us, but nonetheless I believe that this is not the most important thing. It is way more important to materialize the existing recognitions than to just go after increasing the number of recognitions. So our government and state of Kosovo in general, throughout these 6 years, we developed a kind of strange fetishism out of a number of countries who recognize us. Don't misunderstand me. Of course, I want more countries to recognize us. But I think that our priority should be materialization of existing recognitions. How are we going to really turn them into a concrete material benefits for state of Kosovo that a certain state somewhere in another continent recognizes? Point 5 is that in foreign policy, relations of Kosovo with other countries should depend from the stances of these other countries toward independence, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of Republic of Kosovo. It is not fair to treat identically countries who do not treat us the same. You know very well that 104 countries recognize Kosovo, let's say, and now treating these countries who recognize Kosovo in the same manner as the countries who did not recognize Kosovo represents an injustice toward the countries who recognize Kosovo. The international community is divided when it comes to Kosovo, so it is not up to us to unite them. We shall unite them by enabling others to faster recognize us, but not by treating them in the same manner as we treat the countries who did recognize us. Therefore, we should be engaged in a policy where state of Kosovo should not have enemies, meanwhile recognizing that this is very difficult, and at the same time we shall have, let's say, a hierarchy of friends, because besides the fact that we shall not treat them equally, since they are not identical in their stances toward us, at the same time, countries who recognize us are not equally friendly. Some of the countries are much more friendly to Kosovo than some other countries. Some countries recognized us because they actually didn't have any other choice, since we know very well that the countries who recognized the Republic of Kosovo recognized us mainly after the United States, Germany, UK, Italy, France, these big powers recognized us first, and then other countries came after. So some of the countries who recognized us later on cannot be compared with some of the countries who recognized us at the very beginning. And in international politics, one can notice that very easily. Point 6 is that I believe that foreign trade should be part of foreign policy. Kosovo doesn't produce much. You know very well that we have huge trade deficit. Export-import ratio is 1 to 10. This means that 10 times more we import than we export. However, we believe that we shall not have a policy, free trade policy toward all the countries without taking into consideration their stances toward us. So having a free trade agreement with Germany and US on one hand and with Serbia on the other hand, I believe is not fair. And the point 7 is that the foreign policy of Kosovo in the region shall take into consideration how Albanians are treated in those countries. I believe that we should not have foreign relations with Macedonia, Montenegro, Turkey, Serbia, without taking into consideration how Albanians are treated in these countries. And we know very well that it is Kosovo Liberation Army was basically an armed uprising of the Albanian people of Kosovo against Serbian state, not Serbian nation, not Serbian people, but Serbian state, which was led by a regime of Milosevic. So now in our foreign policy, we know very well that Albanians in Montenegro, Macedonia, and in Serbia, and in Turkey, very often are discriminated, underrepresented, exploited. So our foreign policy shall take into consideration this once cooperating with these countries. Just as Albanians are, if I may say so, the truth of Serbia as a state, ask an Albanian what he thinks of Serbia and you will know what Serbia is. I think that this is not very far from truth also from other countries. I believe that in a way the slave is the truth of the master. Maybe the master is the essence of the slave, because the master defines you. You're conditioned from your master. But on the other hand, who is the master? You should ask the slave. The slave is the truth of the master. And the last point is that I think that government of Kosovo and state of Kosovo and institutions of our state should be in a very close relations with the states in Western Europe and in the world in general, where our diaspora is big. And that means US, Germany, Switzerland, but also UK, Scandinavian countries, Italy, Greece, etc. I will just explain a bit my position on Albanian diaspora, because I think it is much more important than we pay attention to it. One journalist asked me some years ago, why do Albanians in Kosovo do not protest in Pristina on 1st of May for workers' rights? And I said that they do protest, but they protest in London, Berlin, Paris, in Zurich, because our working class is there. So where our working class is, there you have protest. So, because it's very difficult to explain why situation in Kosovo is like this, why it is maintained. We have huge trade deficit, but again, if we have this huge trade deficit, how do we manage to survive? According to the statistical agency of Kosovo, in the last year, more than 600 million euros officially came from our families who are in Western Europe and US and around the world. They sent to the families here in Kosovo and to their friends. Unofficially, it's 1 billion euros. The budget of Kosovo is $1.5 billion. Irish diaspora probably gives more money than Albanian diaspora. But again, this kind of discrepancy between the remittances from diaspora on one hand and the budget of the state on the other, I don't think that this kind of ratio exists in any other case, extreme ratio like in Kosovo. So we get unofficially 1 billion from our diaspora, and our budget is $1.5 billion. So it's like 2/3 of our budget we get every year. And I think that foreign policy, not only developmental policies, should take into consideration this, because our most hard-working people are not in Kosovo, and they contribute to the economy of Kosovo. But on the other hand, I must say that some of the best scholars and students that we have are not in Kosovo anymore. Wherever you go in Western Europe, you will find some great Albanian professors in Germany, in France, in UK, in US. So I would love to see them coming back and participating in the teaching process in University of Pristina, for example, where the situation is very grave. I know that a lot of your professors lived abroad, studied abroad, and this is a great opportunity you have here. When I went recently in London, I said to the Albanians there, if you have a bit of money as savings, please do not buy a new house or a new luxury car, but spend that money for the education of your children, yourself, or your friends and your relatives, because the only capital which increases through division is knowledge. All other forms of capitals, through division, they get smaller. And get these great universities that you have in UK, use this opportunity and emancipate yourself. So, some of our best students and professors are abroad. Most hard-working people are abroad. Some of our greatest patriots traditionally were abroad. And there is a legitimate question, who is inside and who is outside. Maybe we who are here actually are outside and they are inside. So I don't know if it is good anymore to speak in terms of foreign policy about our diaspora, because they enabled liberation war, decade and a half ago, and today they maintain this fragile social peace that we have. So in a way, our diaspora is guilty that we won the war, and they are guilty that we are not losing the peace. So I think that foreign policy of Kosovo shall much more take care about our diaspora, which can play a great role for affirmation of the state of Kosovo and for improving our image in the world. Again, I think that it is important for all Albanians who live abroad, if they are students, to get into student organizations. If they have the right to vote for the elections in those countries there, not only for the elections here. If they are workers, to get into unions, to organize themselves, to be politically active, and in this way to manage better, to achieve better rights. Because, for example, if you get a pro bono lawyer in Switzerland, even if you have been expelled from your job, it is through the union's lawyers that you can go back after you have been unjustly dismissed. So they can increase their rights and achieve better situation for themselves on one hand, and on the other, this could be beneficial for the entire state of Kosovo and our nation. So we also should help them to help us, to help them, and so on. This is my last point, 8. I wouldn't like to take much of your time because I like more debates than presentations, including mine. So I think that one last thing is that diplomacy that we have been conducting in Parliament of Kosovo is parliamentary diplomacy, but this should be linked both with cultural diplomacy and public diplomacy. And the very last thing is that if, for one thing, I'm very sorry in this Parliament of Kosovo that I have been meeting different international officials, participating together with my colleagues from different political parties, and for the government, is that in general, Albanian political representatives do too much ceremonial, formal meetings with internationals. And this should change. And I think that a new generation of politicians should come, and one of the things that they should change is this: to speak more of substance and content and less in ceremonial, formal aspect. Because it comes out that very often the most important part of the meeting was the meeting itself taking place. So we need to push our national and state and developmental and social agenda in relations with international officials, not only those who are in Kosovo, by being more concrete, more thoughtful, and less formal and ceremonial. So thank you very much for your attention, and perhaps we can continue with the debate.
Thank you, Albin. I'm sure you're open to questions, so now please. Tim.
I'm Tim, I'm from the third year, and my question is regarding foreign policy in Ukraine right now. So do you think that the referendum happening in Crimea gives a legal basis to other places to do the same thing? Let's say Eastern Kosovo, how we call it, or like Southern Serbia, or half of Macedonia, which is like Albanians, or north of Greece, which is also part of Albanians.
Do you think it's best if I answer immediately or I take several questions?
Probably should answer immediately.
Okay. I know very well that Putin is trying to create a kind of parallel between Kosovo and Crimea in Ukraine by saying that since the Kosovars got self-determination, therefore also people of Crimea will should get self-determination. I think that these two situations should not be compared. First of all, self-determination has to do with autonomy of the people who express their own will for their own state, And self-determination have two aspects: external self-determination and internal one. Self-determination consists in authenticity of people and on them being native people as well, having the right to choose for their future. But in Crimea, I see Putin choosing about people of Crimea. I don't see any of these three A's, let's say: autonomy, authenticity, and nativeness, autochthonous, as we say in Albania. So these three A's are not there. So it's rather self-determination as an instrument for a hegemonic power. It is my impression that after disintegration of Soviet Union, we are getting a big octopus, where Russia is in the center and the tentacles are Belarus now, Crimea, then South Ossetia, Abkhazia, Belarus, even Armenia and Kyrgyzia at some extent. So all these countries are serving as tentacles to Putin. I think Serbia is playing more or less a similar role in the Balkans. After disintegration of Yugoslavia, we got Serbia with its tentacles. Republika Srpska in Bosnia, 30% of population in Montenegro who declared themselves Serbs, and they have their own parties because they were against independence. North of Kosovo, Serbian Orthodox Church in Macedonia, and so on. So it's like big octopus and small octopus. So I think that they are doing a harm to the concept of self-determination by misusing it. Because the concept of self-determination was launched by Woodrow Wilson in Versailles Conference 1919. Later on, many countries got their states. Like many nations got their states because there were so many stateless nations. I think that Albanians in Valley of Preševa are underrepresented, discriminated, exploited, and the border between Kosovo and Serbia is not the border of Kosovo, it's the border of Serbia, because they have been put in this, and I do not think that these two situations can compare with each other, because it is not Tirana who is, in a way, financing Valley of Preševa, going there with the army, and then saying that Valley of Preševa has the right for self-determination, like Putin is doing in Crimea. So self-determination of Albanians belongs to the register of defensive nationalism, if I may say so, while self-determination of Crimea and South Ossetia and Abkhazia, I think, is an expression of hegemony of Moscow, which is something completely different.
So my name is Dog. I would like to ask, when it comes to foreign policy with Turkey, for example, as you said, how would you treat them in a more fair way, because they're not as fair to Albanians in Turkey as we are, for example, to Turkish people here, especially considering that, for example, Kek has been taken over by Turkish, the airport has been taken over by Turkish. How would you fix this? And like, I remember Erdogan came to Prizren. I never saw so many people in Prizren outside. Like, it's crazy. How would you treat them? I don't know.
I believe that reciprocity is one of the important ways to build sustainable and sincere friendly relations with other countries. Whenever we meet with members of parliament from Turkey or different Turkish officials, I think that it is important to emphasize this reciprocity. It is good for Turkey to invest in Kosovo, but what I do not like in these investments is that they come to take part in this brutal, abusive privatization. They do not come to build a factory where we will employ people. Of course, they will be those who are most beneficial, but nonetheless, also the social and economic situation will get better in Kosovo. So it's only banks and asphalt, with Enka and with TEB. And Limak Çelik, one with the airport, the other with distribution and supply of cake. So I think we shall welcome foreign investment, but we should a bit see where this foreign investment is taking place. if it's taking place in a corrupted process of privatization, then it's not going to be beneficial for us. And I think that we should make clear this to Turkish government. But it's not being done by our Prime Minister and by our government. This is one thing. Second thing is that I think that Turkey should have good relations with Kosovo, with Albania, with other countries of Western Balkans in the level of partnership and alliances. Because sometimes I notice that they like to use these words like, oh, you are our brothers, you are my brother, or like, we are the same family. I don't like these family-related synonyms, I must say, because, you know, I have one brother who is younger than me, and one thing that we know for sure is that for the rest of our lives, he's not going to be my big brother. It's over. So I cannot become mother to my mother. It's over. So in a way, inequality is a fact in family. Family exists through harmony and love in spite of inequality. So I don't think that this brother, sister, mother, you know, this is a good language for a proper relations. I like more alliances and partnership. This is much better. So because language is important, as we all know. So I noticed some of them saying that we do not consider you as being something else or other. We are one family, we are brothers, and we consider you to be our brother and so on. I think that our government and people who represent our country shall not allow this kind of synonyms and analogies in foreign policy. Where we shall ask for help of Turkey is because they have the archives of Ottoman Empire in Istanbul, and those are very valuable. In 1908, Ottoman Empire in 4 vilayets, which were mainly inhabited with Albanians, they did a census and they registered even the type of your dog. So in a way, Ottoman Empire was very famous for being a great bureaucracy, like with a lot of archives. And I think in order to fight all Serbian ambitions for Kosovo, archives in Istanbul are a great argument for us. So it would be good, Kosovo and Turkey, to have an agreement where some Albanian historians will spend 5 to 10 years in Istanbul archives, and where we would get a lot of arguments for our sovereignty, statehood, and in our, let's say, continuous battle with Serbia, which is not anymore armed conflict or war, but nonetheless in other levels it's still there. It's a kind of Cold War. So we must get stronger, and I think that in anti-colonial discourse, we would get some great arguments from the archives in Istanbul from the time of Ottoman Empire.
One question I would ask, in a sense, on their behalf. You mentioned very properly, I think, the issue of the diaspora money coming back to build another house, buy another taxi, open another restaurant, rather than to improve the quality of the University of Pristina, or indeed, I might hope, the American University of Kosovo. My question is, are there any incentives in place in the government of Kosovo, tax incentives or otherwise, that would encourage the diaspora to make donations to those kinds of institutions rather than essentially coming back from consumer spending? And if there are not such incentives, are there ways that they could be developed to encourage the diaspora, for example, to donate money to scholarships at the UK? There are incentives in some countries abroad, for example, the tax deduction in the United States, but I'm unaware if there are any in Kosovo.
Yes. Thank you. First of all, I want just to clarify my position that I'm not against our diaspora investing in Kosovo. I'm pro that. I just don't like when they buy another big house or a big luxury car and they don't really use it. A big house, you cannot imagine how many of the houses in Kosovo are simply empty. Because Albanians every day think to come back. I know our diaspora pretty well. There is not a single day that any one of them do not think one day that they will come back. And some of the statistics, I read some sociological study of diaspora, says that if you spend more than 8 years in diaspora, it is more likely that you're not going to come back than that you're going to come back. Of course, you still have chances to come back, but 50% is now on the other side. So 51%. And I think that whenever it's like 8, 9, 10 years that our diaspora is there, in order to convince themselves that they are going to come back, they buy a new house. And I think that's not good. I would like to see property turn into capital, not capital turn into property. It is good for them to maybe open a restaurant, or even better than a restaurant, a small factory, food processing or something, which will bring employment. But that is not very easy here because of widespread corruption. Therefore, I think that meanwhile that they are not coming back, while every day thinking of coming back, they should invest in their children, in the education here, and so on. We had huge brain drain problem in these 14 years, and I must say that I think that some of the neoliberal policies here are to blame. I will explain this a bit. When UNMIK arrived in Kosovo, they told us that we must become attractive for foreign investment. And one of the ways to become attractive for foreign investments is to have a qualified unemployment. A lot of people who have diplomas, graduated, and that's how you become attractive for different foreign corporations to come and invest here. But what happened is that almost everybody got a diploma in University of Pristina, and then there was no foreign investment, there were no jobs, and the best left. So only in Berlin I have 5 friends, all younger than me, who work in health sector in Berlin. The people that I know, my friends, and they were all with all 10 or A's in Faculty of Medicine. So I think that jobs and education should go hand in hand. I'm afraid that it's not a good solution to have first only education and then to wait for jobs. This is true in the life of an individual, but in the life of a society, employment and education shall not be in a diachronic relation, but rather in synchronic relation, to go hand in hand. And I think that some of our best students and professors, we should bring them back. When I was in University of Heidelberg in Germany, there was one student from VT. She was doing theory of justice and criminal codes, analyzing penal codes and so on. Brilliant mind, and she should maybe become a prosecutor in Kosovo, or a professor at the Faculty of Law, and so on. I think that after brain drain, we should have brain gain. I saw some of the projects of our government, but they are not really serious, I must say. Sometimes they offer scholarships for students here who go and study abroad, and they have to work in the ministry for 3 years, I think, but none of them works 3 years, and there is not much to do, as they say. So I'm not very optimistic in this sense. I think that changes should happen elsewhere. I'm not very optimistic that this government is going to do that. And when it comes to incentives, one of the key issues that some future government should do is the best students, to have incentive for best students to remain within the university. Because the best students are leaving. And in University of Pristina, this is one big problem. Best students should go to high schools, remain in the university, become professor assistants, then later on lecture and whatever. But we need also incentives to keep the best students within the system of education after we made sure that the best students are not going to leave. Because the greatest problem that Kosovo has is this brain drain.
My name is Ketar Kasmisri. I'm a fourth-year student at the UK. I have a comment and a question. So my comment was, you mentioned earlier the archives of the Turkey. I think that Turkey doesn't want to open those archives because there are many facts about the ancestry of many Turkish leaders that they don't want to show their people. The question that I have is about Russia and Serbia. I saw somewhere in the news 2 days before that Serbia was a little bit angry at Russia that they mentioned the Kosovo case in relation with Crimea. So do you think this kind of, if that goes forward, if Crimea gets something, would that damage the relations between Serbia and Russia?
Well, I'm afraid not. I think that, I was 2.5 years in prisons in Serbia, and I know Serbian history better than the average Serb. And once you read that history, you understand that the ties there are very deep. Let's not forget that the conceiving and the growth of Serbian state appeared historically in these 2 centuries, especially in the 19th century, as a concession of Ottoman Empire to Russian Empire. So that is how Serbia came about in the first place. And 1 century ago, the liberals and the social democrats in Serbia, they lost the battle with radicals. Nikola Pasic won, and the entire political elite today in Serbia is from the legacy of Nikola Pasic. While the legacy of Dimitrije Tucović and Miroslav Gračanac is less than 10%. Čedomir Ivanović and Žarko Korać. So if Žarko Korać and Čedomir Ivanović would be in power there, we could hope that the relation with Russia would change. As long as these others are in power, I don't have any such hopes. But Crimea is not going to become an independent state. It will become new Abkhazia, new South Ossetia. EU wants to separate small octopus from big octopus, from the mother octopus, like to take over Serbia. But the problem is that Serbia is not in front of a choice, either Russia or EU. They think they can have both. Likewise, they are not in front of a choice, either EU or Kosovo. They think they can have both. So we must follow very closely all these geopolitical dynamics that are happening. But I don't think that the relations between Serbia and Russia are going to change much in the near future.
My name is Vetëvendosje. I'm a senior in the UK and my majors are economics and management. And as an economic, I wanted to ask you about the highway project. The tender was given to Vetëvendosje. And I want to know your opinion on it because more than 80% of the work was done by our companies, Kosovo, and less than 20 was done by them, but they got the work. So in my opinion, I think the tender was supposed to give in to our companies because we get the money and we spend it in our country, as in them. So I want to know your opinion on that.
Well, I agree with you. Of course, we all like nice highways, but we are paying it 3 times more expensive than market prices. We are paying 12 million euros per kilometer of highway with 4 lanes. It's 3 times more expensive than it should be. And it's not fair. And the contract officially has never been published. Of course, there's corruption in question.
Yes,
And now they're going to build another highway with Skopje.
yes.
Skopje, Macedonia. And altogether, both highways will cost 1.4 billion euros, which is approximately the annual budget of the state. And I think that one should have hand in hand better infrastructure and factories where you produce, even according to liberal magazines, for example, like The Economist, 2 years ago there was a very interesting survey and long article that social and medium enterprises are of course important, but the most important thing is whether you grow or not. Because in Kosovo it has become easier to exist as an enterprise, but it has become more difficult to grow. So legally it is more easy to get born as a business, but economically you die out sooner. So 55% of manufacturing enterprises in Germany have more than 250 employees. In Portugal it's 19%. In Kosovo is 0.8%. 80% of more than 60,000 enterprises we have in Kosovo have one employee who happens to be the employer, the guard, the financial officer, the manager, everything. So it's a one-man shop. So, and I think that we need more manufacture, we need more factories where you're going to have accumulation of capital, not only circulation of capital. Highways are there for circulation of capital. We need places where we are going to grow, where we're going to have accumulation of capital. I'm not saying that now we should produce cameras and sophisticated technology. But at the same time, I think that it's ridiculous that elementary food is being imported in Kosovo. Can you imagine? We import from garlic from China and chickens from Brazil. Our grandfathers used to produce these, and they were totally illiterate. Now we have became a country which imports like no other country, and we have not good hospitals, not good schools, no jobs, but we get this smooth highway. You know? It's like as if we're going to live on trailers. And you just stop nearby on a highway, and there you have well-being. If you drop outside from the highway, it's misery. You know, so only like nation on a highway somehow. And I think that this should change because infrastructure is a carrier of economic development, but cannot represent economic development by itself. Energy and highways are important for economic development, but you cannot say that we have them, therefore we have development. So development comes after. And there is a lot of corruption in these contracts. And I think it's not being really investigated, because there's huge money in question. Rule of law in Kosovo is rule of law for the weak, not for the strong. Big sharks, they dine together with prosecutors, judges, and even EULEX, I must say. Of course, our government is there as well. While at best, mid-level fishes of corruption, they enter in prison. But not these people who stole millions from our country. And I think the other side of the same coin is that workers there are being exploited. I heard that they work for €7 per day. And there are several workers who died while building the highway. So this highway is costing €1 billion and 4 or 5 workers who died already there, and nobody mentions them.
I would like to ask, do you think Kosovo should play a bigger role for Albania in especially representing Albanians all over the Balkans and especially in the Western world? Like you mentioned, they've been discriminated in Montenegro, Macedonia, Serbia. Do you think we should play a bigger role for defending their rights than Albania does? Because I think that we actually do more than Albania does right now. What do you think?
Well, whenever a politician from Croatia comes to Kosovo, one of the topics is Croats in Kosovo. And do you know how many Croats are in Kosovo? 218. 218 Croats, and one of the 3 main topics is Croats in Kosovo, in Janjeva. And I don't blame them. This is how it should be. And Albanian politicians, not only from Kosovo, but also from Albania, when they go to Montenegro, they go directly to Podgorica. They don't stop in Ulcin, for example. When they go to Macedonia, they don't go to Tetova and to Albanian quarters in Shkup, directly to institutions meeting their Macedonian counterparts. I think that it's not just a duty, it's an obligation. We should take care of these people, because there wouldn't be independence of Albania in the first place 1 century ago, and there wouldn't be independence of Kosovo and liberation of Kosovo without all of Albanians. They all contributed. Now to tell them that, oh, you are not in my state, is not fair. So, of course, we cannot do everything for them, but we should help them. And even though some might try to say that they are different from us and so on, don't ever forget that all our adversaries treat us the same. It's like those who do not like independence of Kosovo and do not like Albania and Albanians in general, they do not make much differences which Albanian is coming from which place. And our Albanian diaspora is united. Whenever I went in Western Europe or in US, I see that Albanians from Macedonia, from Valley of Breševa, from Montenegro, from Albania and Kosovo, they are together. So I think that our foreign policy should respond to this togetherness of the Albanians. Not against somebody else, not at the expense of other nations, but for the sake of our own people and progress.
I have a question on the idea of national unity for Albania and Kosovo. I want to know how you see Kosovo being united with Albania. Do you see it as a melting, like Kosovo melting into Albania, or do you see it more as a federation system, like the two countries joined together?
Well, I think that that is open for discussion, and I think that if elites in Pristina and in Tirana insist that it should not be a kind of melting immediately, but we shall have a federation for some years, I don't think that that is totally unacceptable. I think that we could discuss about this. But Kosovo should have the right to join Albania. At present, we do not have that right. Article 1.3 of the Constitution of Kosovo does not allow Kosovo to join another country. And this is an undemocratic principle in our Constitution. And it does not belong there. I know why it was put there, in order not to make Serbia angry. But you know, we shall not live by having in our minds all the time what Serbia will think for what we do. If we are independent, sovereign, I think that we should take care first of all about our own will, rights and interests, and later on about Serbia, because independence in the first place was independence from Serbia. And they took it likewise from the Constitution of Austria, because in Constitution of Austria, if I'm not wrong, Article 4 says that Austria cannot have Anschluss to Germany. But wait a minute, we did not have Hitler. Serbia had Milosevic. Why not impose this on Serbia? Why on Kosovo? So they took this case of Austria and they imposed on a society of victims, Kosovo. It would have been much more logical to impose it on Serbia. I'm not asking for unification of Kosovo with Albania violently or undemocratically. I think that in peaceful and democratic manner it should happen, and I believe it will happen. We were divided, we were separated in undemocratic and violent way. And now unification should be different in method as well, in democratic and peaceful manner. According to Gallup International, some years back, if the referendum would take place, in Albania would be 63% pro, in Kosovo 81%. I don't know if this changed in these last years, but I think more or less it's there. Once we are allowed to have referendum, it would increase probably for another 10% or so. So I'm optimistic because economic aspect and security aspects of our people would benefit a lot from unification. They have sea, mountains, water. We have minerals, good fields for agriculture. So it's a very nice combination in economic aspect as well.
Any other question?
I was kind of wondering. Well, I'm mental, everybody knows me as an academic advisor, but I know some little things about international law, so I'm interested to know, can we, as citizens, influence foreign policy of Kosovo? Somehow, anyway, in a way. Institutionalized way. Make them listen to us. Do this, ambassador, do that, ambassador. Who creates foreign policy in Kosovo anyway?
I think that the foreign policy of our government is very much relying on international community and on countries who helped Kosovo liberate itself and help Kosovo declare independence. So key lines of foreign policy are somehow policy of the foreigners. But not necessarily bad, because if you look at our government, it could be actually good. That, our foreign service has huge obstacles because of partisanship politics in appointing ambassadors and the staff in our embassies. I think that not our best people became ambassador, and some of our ambassadors are not, I must say, I'm sorry, but they are mediocre. And this is a very sad thing for me as a chair of the Committee on Foreign Affairs. What we do in the parliament is that we hold our minister accountable. What he's doing, what he's not doing, where he was not that responsible, at the level of his task and so on. But I think that people of Kosovo could contribute a lot in cultural diplomacy and public diplomacy, because every intellectual, every scholar, every student, every professional can contribute in better image of Kosovo and better relations with others. In one hand, our government has this tendency to monopolize foreign policy. But on the other hand, internally, government is totally decentralized in foreign policy. Because you have two deputy prime ministers, they deal with foreign policy. Prime minister, president, and you have two ministers. Minister for Foreign Policy Minister and Minister for European Integration. Minister of Foreign Affairs and Minister for European Integration. So it's very decentralized internally, and externally it's monopolized. I think that we need perhaps more active civil society in foreign affairs. And we have a Foreign Policy Club is one NGO. There is another one, Group for Political and Legal Studies. But just to mention a few of them. But however, civil society is much rich in asking for accountability from our institutions when it comes to other aspects, and not much when it comes to foreign policy.
My name is Albin, and I have a question regarding to Serbian elections in Kosovo. Recently, a Serbian official said that there will be Serbian elections in Kosovo, and the government won't find an excuse for that. Regarding to this, how Kosovo should react to this statement? Is that a foreign statement that should be made by Kosovo, or is this like we are going to find an excuse again?
Well, I think that our government is very likely will allow these elections to take place next Sunday. They should have a clear political stand that they are not going to allow these elections to take place. They are not going to recognize these elections, but they are not going to do this. And all the election material, I believe, should not be allowed to enter Kosovo. In all the crossing borders, all crossing points of our borders, we should not allow election material from the Central Election Committee of the Republic of Serbia to enter Kosovo. Also, we should not allow public buildings to be used as polling stations. And I think it is possible, but first you must respect your own law and constitution, and you must have political will for that. I think that it is very likely, as you said, that they are going to take some excuses in order to absolve themselves from the tolerance of these elections. They're going to tolerate them, I think, because they want to preserve good relations with Belgrade, and in this way, I believe Brussels not to be at Thach's neck anymore, despite the corruption.
Hi everyone, my name is Shrijan. I just have a comment regarding this question that my colleague made. According to some convention, Vienna Convention if I'm not mistaken, these elections are allowed to take place in the neighboring country. Why are not we allowing the Serbian elections to take place? Is it because they're threatening our sovereignty? Or why are we not allowing these elections to take place? Or why shouldn't we allow these elections to take place the next coming Sunday?
Elections of Serbia, which are being planned to be held in Kosovo as well, are going to take place in compliance with the Constitution of the Republic of Serbia, which says that Kosovo is part of Serbia. So whenever you vote, you do not simply choose. You legitimize the frame within the which you choose. So when Serbs will vote, they will vote for political parties that are within that constitution of Serbia. All laws of Serbia are in compliance with this constitution, and all strategies. For example, in National Defense Strategy of Serbia, Kosovo has been pointed out as the key danger to Serbia, and they act accordingly. Just to take one example. So I think that elections of Serbia in Kosovo will be held as if Kosovo is part of Serbia. And in the best case scenario for our country, at least they could have been allowed if the Serbs would vote in their embassy or representative office of Serbia in Kosovo. They have one in European Commission now. If the Serbs would go or send by mail their votes to this office, okay, maybe that could have been tolerated, even though even that is not just and legal. But they are going to vote wherever they are as if Kosovo is part of Serbia. And I think this is not neither just and fair nor legal. It's going to be, in the sense, illegal that our police is not going to act. So our police, basically, on Sunday, they will violate the law by not conducting law enforcement.
Yes.
I am Kyola Shuko, an AFK alumni. I'll bring the topic to the reciprocity issue again. You mentioned that for the countries that do not treat Albanians there fairly, we should be conscious that they are investments, or this is the way I understood it. Is that the point? Like we should pay attention on Albanians treated fairly in the countries also.
Yeah, we should, whenever we meet counterparts there, we shall raise this question. Because very often our politicians, they meet with the neighboring countries, they never bring the issue of Albanians living in those countries. And I think that foreign trade should be part of foreign policy.
Okay. Well, my question is, do we have the political strength and economic sustainability of applying it? So at this stage, are we in a position of saying, hey friend, I know you have some money and you want to give them, to invest them in my country, of course upon your benefit, but you want to invest them in my country, but Albanians in your country do not have a school, so I cannot get that offer. Are we in that position? Or
Well, for example, regarding Macedonia, Macedonia is like 300 to 400 million euros, I think, they take every year by selling their goods in Kosovo, while they treat very badly Albanians there. And I think that our politicians should raise this issue. I cannot become your market as long as you oppress my people. I think every country does this, every normal country.
At
Now-
this point, do we
yeah.
have the capacity of
Well,
producing all what we are buying?
No, no, no. I'm not saying that we can produce everything. No country produces everything, but you can choose from whom to buy. And I think that Montenegro, for example, is conditioning the opening of the Kosovar embassy in Podgorica with guaranteeing for Montenegrins of Kosovo the same status as Serbs, by giving them reserved seats in the parliament of Kosovo. So you see, Montenegro, which is 4 times smaller than us, has the strength.
But you have the political strength, right?
Yeah, political strength, yeah, I could agree with you. We do not have. Because of this government, we don't. We should switch.
Well, we mentioned the corrupt government, and we all know they're corrupt, obviously. No, seriously, yeah. But we see that the people in Ukraine are rioted. A couple of months ago, they even rioted in Bosnia. They burned, I think, a Serbian party headquarters or something. They burned that down. They're rioting in Venezuela and almost everywhere because of the corruption. With Kosovo, which has so much corruption going on, why do our people do not get out and riot? For example, for Vetëvendosje, I saw the other day, they rioted, and maybe 300 people rioted there. They protested. I'm not going to say riot, but they protested. While in all the coffee shops around, there were like hundreds of people sitting down and just drinking coffee and watching and be like, we don't care. Why do we not do the same thing? Why do we not, how shall I put it, fight for our rights, fight for the better of our people, when other people do it and their cases are even worse than we are?
Well, this is, it will take another hour, but because this is one of the key questions, I believe. Why are we so patient? I wrote one text where I compare the situation during Serbia is like prison. In prison, you're all equal, but you have no freedom. After liberation, we got international protectorate. We are not being ill-treated anymore with UNMIK. We're not being ill-treated anymore physically, but nonetheless, we didn't have the right to self-determination. It was like getting out from prison, entering hospital. Because in hospital, you know, they don't physically abuse you anymore, but you have this plastic orange smile of the nurse coming to you and telling that today patience is a bit better, he drank the soup entirely. So I think we entered this international protectorate like a hospital. And maybe we are patient because we are patients. So, because you see how is the etymology of this word, patience, very interesting. Of course, Albanians are too patient. I cannot explain myself. It's like, I don't think it's rational. I think that being patient at the face of huge injustice, poverty, and unemployment is not rational. So it's irrational. And I noticed also this phenomena where, you know, we have this macchiato subculture. I drink macchiato too. No, we all drink macchiato. It's a subculture already now. And I was teasing Albanian diaspora when I went into the meetings there by saying that you work here without break and we maintain your coffee break. So we have divided our tasks. We do the break and you do the work. I think that the fact that we are being maintained by our diaspora contributes to this factor, that we do not have a working force properly as we should. Albanians don't go to the army, Albanians don't go to the factories, we do not have industry. So we are at this level of finances and services without manufacture and like discipline. So Visari Meri, the head of parliamentary group of Vetëvendosje, says that there is no other country in the world where people wake up at the moment that their sleep is over. You know, they don't wake up at 7 or 8 or 9, but whenever their sleep is over, that is the moment when they wake up. Because they don't have to go to jobs. You know, there are no jobs for them. They don't have to go to work. And but again, I will say something very strange now, so don't take me very seriously. I read a book in prison from Bertrand Russell. In 1927, he went to China, and he was so fascinated with China. He said, how come that Chinese people are so calm and patient? Japan occupied them whenever they wanted, you know? And can you imagine, Chinese people, they have built this wall to protect themselves from the Mongols, while being 10 times more than them. It would have been logical that Mongols would build the wall, not the Chinese. Why is this so? And he came to a very interesting conclusion, because to cut a long story short, that Chinese people are very patient, not anymore now as we can see them, you know, but this is 1927. They are very patient because they are ancient people. And he develops this idea that people which are native and very ancient are somehow very patient. People in Egypt, for example, they endured Mubarak 42 years. Can you imagine? You know? 42 years Mubarak was there. So, and Egypt is the oldest state. Denmark is the oldest kingdom. In Europe, Japan is the oldest kingdom in the world. Egypt is the oldest state. So people of Egypt are very ancient. So as if Albanians, who we all know from the history, are very ancient people and somehow have a different relation with time from developed industrial countries. So this could be one socio-historical explanation, even though it's very vague, I must say. And I hope that people will become active sooner rather than later, because if you wait too long, then your reaction is more violent. So it is much better to be active earlier on than to endure injustice for too long, because then you get overreaction in a violent manner, and at the same time it becomes a traumatic experience. Because whenever people do not react when they should, it becomes a trauma. Because if you do not act, you repress yourself internally. And okay, I don't agree with Freud entirely, but sooner or later you get the return of the repressed. You know, what you have been repressed, it comes later on. So I think whenever you have this injustice, one should act upon injustice and not wait too long. And you can plan better, you can have better results if you act earlier on, and so on.
Okay.
I have a question about the evidence. They keep getting some people, arresting them 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, releasing them. Everyone knows, for some people, that they have, I'm not saying about the crime or war crimes, but they have been corrupted. They have been, you know, mistreating their position, but they're not doing anything.
In Mother Teresa Street, you have a dozen of prosecutors and judges having coffees without bodyguards. You know why? They did harm to no one. So is there any kind of strong mafia guy that was put in prison and now our prosecutors and judges are afraid? No. It's the Prime Minister, the ministers, the MPs, the President who have bodyguards and armored vehicles, while prosecutors and judges, they walk freely because they don't really combat crime. And you have probably noticed how on our TV, it is the defense counsels who appear way more than prosecutors. And do you happen, any one of you, to know any prosecutor of Kosovo by his or her full name? For example. Yeah, okay, Ismet Kaboshi, one Ismet Kaboshi. But you see, but if you would mention defense counsels, you would know Tom Gosh, you would know many. So we should reverse the situation where prosecutors should become much more famous in Kosovo than defense counsels. That would be a good public sign that we are walking on the right direction.
We have that last question, please.
I'm Lisa Jumwaya and I'm a sophomore, and I want to go back to the topic about the unification of Albania and Kosovo. You said that you think it would help us in terms of economy and security. But do you really think it would help us politically, because we already have a lot of tension between political parties?
Yes, I have been also confronted with this idea that Kosovo and Albania, we both have problems, and if we join each other, we're going to multiply the problems. You know, we're going just to make a sum of these problems. So why on earth get into this project? But sometimes you could read this situation from a different angle. And that is that some of the problems we have because we are divided. So of course, Albania has many problems, Kosovo even more so. But once we get united, we could get less problems, because some of the problems we have precisely because we're divided. For example, in Rahovec, they have very qualitative kind of grape, which can be used for qualitative wine. But many businessmen in Albania who produce wine there, it's not beneficial for them to come and take the grape from Rahovec, because they have to pay taxes in the border. So, for example, this is one small illustration that by merging as one country, we could benefit economically. Let's not forget that the level of integration between Kosovo and Albania does not match the level of integration of European countries. We do not have one currency. We have euro, they have lek. We do not have one central bank, as EU does. And we do not have a common market yet. So in a way, we lag behind in national integration in comparison with the European integration. It is much easier to find one good Minister of Education from, let's say, 6 million people than from 2 million people. I think that we would join our human resources. It's much better and easier to create a strong administration, state administration, from, let's say, 6 million people than from 2 million in Kosovo and 3.5 or 4 in Albania. So we would join our natural resources, human resources, and I think we would become a greater market. We would be more attractive for foreign investment. Not even our diaspora is investing at present. And I think it is much better if we join each other before we join into EU. Because some people also say that, okay, we can join with Albania once we are into EU. In EU, you join with the Danish people, with the Dutch, with Germans. I think in the Balkans, in the next 10 to 15 years, Kosovo and Albania will not join EU. Therefore, it's better to join each other and get stronger. Stronger you get prior to entering into EU, better your position inside EU once you become a member.
Okay, since that was the last question, and I know that most of us have classes from 2 o'clock, I want to thank you very much, Albin, for coming here today. I don't know if you have any questions or any comments.
No, thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you all for coming.